In 1987, a woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy was shot in her apartment after days of frantically calling the police, telling them that she's been seeing people come through her bathroom medicine cabinet. Look into the mirror and say his name 5 times. You will summon a hook-handed serial killer with an insatiable lust for blood. He will come through the mirror and brutally slaughter you with his prosthetic weapon, as every time he kills a non-believer or somebody who mocks his macabre legacy, he keeps his legend alive. His name is Candyman. 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 We first get to know Candyman from Clive Barker's 1985 short story, The Forbidden, from his anthology Books of Blood Volume 5. In the source material for the movie, Candyman haunts the residents of Liverpool, England. He is described as bright to the point of gaudiness. His flesh was a waxy yellow. His thin lips are pale blue. His wild eyes are glittering as if their irises are set with rubies. His jacket was patchwork, and his trousers are the same. He looked, Helen thought, almost ridiculous, with his blood-stained motley and the hint of rouge on his jaundiced cheeks. Many of Candyman's key features are missing from this early incarnation, including his race, his name, and his origin. And in Clive Barker's original story, you didn't have to chant his name, only doubting him was enough to summon him.
Candyman.
It wasn't until the 1992 film and its sequels that we finally found out more about this vengeful spirit and his tragic backstory. Candyman was formerly known as Daniel Robitaille. He was a very educated man that traveled the United States in the 1800s, making a good living painting portraits for mostly rich white people. His fortune would take a horrifying turn for the worse after falling in love with a white woman. When their love affair was discovered, he was beaten, tortured, his right arm that he used for painting was cut off, and they shoved a meat hook in its place. The final blow was just as horrific. The mob covered his incapacitated body with honey, giving him the appearance of a man made of candy. The honey attracted thousands of bees that then stung him to death, as the crowd chanted, "Candyman, Candyman, Candyman." His corpse was burnt on the spot, and his ashes were spread over the land that the Cabrini Green housing project would eventually be built on. In the 1992 movie, Candyman is the oppressor of the Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago. Cabrini Green was a real housing project that was notoriously downtrodden, gang-riddled, and rank with drugs and extreme violence. Things were so bad that the name Cabrini Green had become synonymous with everything wrong with housing projects across the United States. The Chicago Housing Authority began to tear down the dilapidated housing projects in 1995, and the last building to be torn down was demolished in 2011. Today, only a few 2-story houses remain of the project, with the rest of the area becoming gentrified and turned into mixed-income housing due to its proximity to downtown Chicago. Cabrini Green was chosen as the setting for the live-action adaptation of Clive Barker's short story to highlight the class difference and systemic oppression in America. This point was continually driven home throughout the movie, with the Sears Tower, which is a symbol of white American capitalism, clearly visible throughout the movie, as the backdrop to the horrors of Cabrini Green. Helen Lyle, played by Virginia Madsen, comes to Cabrini Green to investigate the Candyman for a thesis for her university. She discovers that Candyman is the scapegoat the residents of Cabrini Green have for their life's misfortunes. She believes that he's simply a myth made up to put a name on the systemic oppression they feel on a daily basis, which, as an expert on the subject, she knows is a basic function that most urban legends serve. However, after surviving an attack by a gang member using Candyman's name to spread fear of himself, Helen has him convicted and is convinced that this would put an end to the Candyman myth, even convincing a young boy that she befriended that Candyman isn't real. This proves to be a grave mistake for Helen, as she is then visited by the metaphysical version of the urban legend himself. Candyman then proves to Helen that he's absolutely real, and he will kill to keep the residents of Cabrini Green talking, which will keep his legend alive. He then frames her for a series of murders to destroy her human life, so he can then kill her, and be together with her in the afterlife. Despite being an entirely fictional character, Candyman is especially interesting because his story actually borrows from a few different real-world urban legends. His hook hand is an obvious ode to the Hook Man, an urban legend as old as urban legends can be. In fact, most cultures throughout the world have their own version of the Hook Man, but they generally all have the same basic concept. A teenage couple parked on a lover's lane are making out in their car. Just as they're about to finally have sex, a warning comes through their radio about an escaped crazed maniac from the local insane asylum.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response.
This frightens the girl, but the boy wants to continue. She stops him and insists that they leave, so the frustrated boy floors it out of the lover's lane and takes her home. Later, when they get out of the car, they discover a disembodied prosthetic hook that's been ripped from its socket, hanging from the passenger side door. This popular legend serves as a warning to teenagers about the dangers of premarital sex, but the legend of the Hook Man became all too real for the residents of Texarkana, Texas. In 1946, the so-called Phantom of Texarkana attacked 3 teenage couples, killing 5, who were all parked on lovers' lanes. The Phantom Killer was never caught, and his legacy has haunted Texarkana ever since. The Town That Dreaded Sundown is a movie about the Phantom Killer of Texarkana, and is widely regarded as the first slasher movie, released in 1976. It predates Halloween by 2 years. Interestingly, the town of Texarkana comes together for a screening of The Town That Dreaded Sundown every year in October at Spring Lake Park. Spring Lake Park is the site of the former Lover's Lane, where Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were brutally murdered by the Phantom Killer. Candyman not only borrows from the Hook Man legend, but also borrows heavily from Bloody Mary, which is a figure that is deeply entrenched in American and European folklore. Many have tried to summon Bloody Mary by standing in a mirror and chanting her name 3 times. If successful, you will see a figure of a ghostly 14-year-old girl in the mirror behind you. Many different versions of her story exist throughout the world, but usually she was a victim of some sort of brutal attack that left her bleeding to death. In one version of the story, she was left blind due to her eyes being spooned out by her attacker. When summoned, she will come through the mirror, viciously attack you, which will leave you bleeding to death as well as eyeless, taking your eyes to replace her own empty eye sockets. In 1987, a woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy, a resident of the Abbott housing projects in Chicago, which were similarly downtrodden and not far from the Cabrini Green housing projects, was shot in her apartment after days of frantically calling the police, telling them that she's been seeing people come through her bathroom medicine cabinet. She was repeatedly dismissed, as she was known to the police to be a mean-tempered, senile woman with multiple mental health problems. But after she wasn't heard from for a few days, police did a wellness check on her and discovered her rotting corpse in her apartment. Apparently, the killers came through the medicine cabinet of the neighboring apartment and into her own, highlighting a massive, and in this case fatal, design flaw for the housing project. Other residents even reported seeing figures come through their own medicine cabinets to run out their apartment front door late at night. Another urban legend we see referenced throughout the series, and one that people still believe to be fact, is the myth of Halloween candy tampering. Every year on Halloween, concerned parents check their children's Halloween candy, looking for razor blades, pins, and open wrappers that may contain poison. Certain hospitals even offer to x-ray children's Halloween candy. However, candy tampering remains a myth, and police say there's no evidence that this is common practice. In fact, there have been no recorded cases of anyone dying or becoming seriously ill or injured due to Halloween candy tampering, except for one night, on Halloween 1974. In Pasadena, Texas, Ronald Clark O'Bryan took his son Timothy, his daughter Elizabeth, and 2 neighbor children out trick-or-treating. Timothy, wearing his Planet of the Apes costume, wanted to go to one more house before heading home to eat their candy with his sister and neighborhood friends. They walk up to the final house on the block. When arriving at the front door, they merrily shouted, "Trick or treat." However, nobody came to the door. After a few more attempts, the children gave up and decided to head home, anxious to eat the candy they had already received. Timothy and Emily's father, Ronald, stayed behind as the children walked home just down the street. When Ronald came home, he told the children the good news. He presented 5 pixie sticks, which he distributed among the children and their friends. Timothy begged his father to be allowed to eat some of his candy before going to bed. Ronald obliged and told Timothy to eat one of the pixie sticks he obtained from the neighbor's house. Timothy excitedly opened the candy to eat it, but he found that the sugar inside had clumped together. Ronald helped his son loosen the powder so Timothy could eat it. Timothy then complained that the candy tasted bitter, and Ronald gave his son some Kool-Aid to wash the bitter taste down. Immediately after, Timothy complained that his stomach hurt, and almost immediately after he ran to the bathroom, he began convulsing and vomiting violently. An ambulance was called for Timothy, but unfortunately he died en route to the hospital in his father's arms. Timothy's death was ruled a homicide due to cyanide poisoning. The chemical was found in all 5 of the pixie sticks that Ronald had obtained from the neighbor's house on Halloween night. Thankfully, his daughter Elizabeth and the neighborhood children had not consumed their contaminated candy. All 4 of the remaining pixie sticks were found. Turns out, they had been previously opened and stapled shut after the cyanide had been poured in. It was determined that the cyanide in Timothy's pixie stick was enough to kill 2 full-grown adults, whereas the cyanide in the other 4 pixie sticks was enough to kill 3 to 4 full-grown adults. The family was grief-stricken, and police promised Ronald that they would find the sick individual that did this to their son. Ronald Clark O'Bryan told police that he was willing to do anything to help them catch his son's killer. He pointed police to the house he got the tainted pixie sticks from, saying he never saw the man's face, but that he had a hairy arm. The house belonged to a man named Courtney Melvin, but upon interviewing Courtney, police found that he had a rock-solid alibi. Courtney was an air traffic controller at William P. Hobby Airport in Houston, Texas. He was at work until 11 p.m. on Halloween night, and he only got home hours after Ronald told the police he got the pixie sticks from Courtney's house. When police investigated this claim, over 200 people were able to corroborate Courtney's alibi. After Courtney was cleared as a suspect, police unfortunately had to point their suspicions at Timothy's own father, Ronald Clark O'Bryan. Police became suspicious when they learned that Ronald only took the children to 2 streets trick-or-treating because it had been raining that night. Since this gave police a short list of homes to investigate, they were quickly able to determine that none of the homes that they had visited that night were in fact handing out pixie sticks. As police continued to investigate, they began to uncover more damning evidence against Ronald. They learned that Ronald had recently taken out life insurance policies on Timothy and Elizabeth, but not on himself or his wife. Turns out, Ronald was $100,000 in debt, which is about $500,000 in today's money, and had extreme difficulty holding down a job, having worked over 20 jobs in the last decade. In January 1974, Ronald took out a $10,000 life insurance policy on each of his children. 1 month before Halloween, Ronald again took out new life insurance policies on both children for $20,000 each, and did the same thing in the days preceding his son's death, despite objections from the insurance company. The total of all the policies he had taken out on his children was about $60,000. Police then learned that Ronald called his insurance company the very next day after Timothy died to inquire about the policies that he had taken out, which was very strange behavior for a grieving father. According to Ronald's friends and family members, Ronald had talked a lot about cyanide in recent months. They described it as an unusual obsession for Ronald, even speaking about how much cyanide it would take to kill a person. Police learned that Ronald had in fact visited a chemical supply store shortly before Halloween 1974 to purchase cyanide, but left without purchasing anything after learning that he was not legally allowed to buy more than 5 pounds of the deadly chemical. The picture, despite how horrific it was, had become all too clear. It was never determined where Ronald actually got the cyanide from, but police gathered enough evidence to charge Ronald Clark O'Bryan with capital murder against his son Timothy, as well as attempted murder against his daughter and the neighborhood children that he would use to help cover up his crime. The case received national attention, and Ronald Clark O'Bryan quickly became known to press as the Candyman, also known to some as the man who killed Halloween. Ronald's defense relied heavily upon the old urban legend of candy tampering, the one that Ronald had attempted to hide behind to cover up his sick and sordid crime. Ronald claimed that there was a, quote, mad poisoner who hands out Halloween needles or razor blades. What Ronald did not know is that there were no previous instances of this ever occurring. Ronald's defense was ultimately unsuccessful. It only took the jury 46 minutes to convict him of all charges, and it only took them 71 minutes to hand out the death penalty. In a strange and sick twist of fate, the Candyman was sentenced to die on October 31st, 1982, the 8th anniversary of 8-year-old Timothy's death. However, after multiple appeals and stays of execution, he was finally executed by lethal injection on March 31st, 1984 in Huntsville, Texas. Ronald's last words were, "I forgive all, and I do mean all, those who have been involved in my death. May God bless you all, and may God's blessings be always yours." After the Candyman's execution, a crowd of about 300 people gathered outside of the prison, many of them shouting "trick or treat" and showering anti-death penalty protesters with candy. The brilliance of the Candyman villain is remarkable. He remains one of horror's most fascinating and sophisticated antagonists due to his high intelligence, while maintaining a demeanor that is not only haunting, but tragic and almost romantic, which is juxtaposed with the sheer brutality of his killings. Candyman is also a direct metaphor for urban legends becoming a reality. Just like many of the real-world legends he is based on, he comes to life to prove that he's real. Candyman is a reminder that you must believe in the lesson within the legend and heed the warning, or else you might become a victim of the tragic consequences, or even worse, become the legend yourself. Much like Ronald Clark O'Bryan did when he became the Halloween Tamperer, and like Helen Lyle did when she became Candyman's successor.